How y'all today? Otho Gold is here to talk to you about that expression, boys will be boys. That expression has been around since at least 1589 when they used the term youth will be youth. But it brought new meaning to my life. I tell you some of the things that I witnessed growing up. Now my story today begins in the school shop. That's where boys, particularly those that were members of the Future Farmers of America, would go, and to avoid the academic curriculum, because they got to go out to the shop and they got to play around with saws and with paint and grinders and arc welders, all that cool stuff. And they learned how to use those things, but it also provided a lot of opportunity for mischief. I remember boys, they used to use get these arc welding electrodes, these long metal things that you use for welding. And they'd take these electrodes and they'd throw them up into the ceiling, and they'd be hanging up there, lots of electrodes hanging down, and at some point in time they got to fall. So if you happen to be underneath one of those when it fell, you've got a long piece of metal that can hit you on the head or other body part and inflict some pretty substantial damage to your body. Man, anyway, the FFA had a mascot. It's part of their logo or their emblem, and in our shop there was a stuffed owl, and that owl was subject to all kinds of abuse. People would hang condoms on its ear, and the shop teacher, his name was Wild Ray, that was his nickname. He was a very patient man, very stocky and exceptionally strong. He'd come in and he'd take the condoms off and he'd say, boys, now y'all can't be putting condoms on the owl's ear. But he didn't know what kind of mischief was up for him in the near future, because these boys, they were playing around with arc welding materials one day, and they decided they'd fill a balloon up with acetylene. Now, acetylene is highly combustible, and so they filled a balloon up, tied put a cigarette on the end of it, and backed away from it, and watched the cigarette burn down. And of course, you know what happened? Boom! Well, they thought that was pretty cool. So, you know, if a small balloon could make a pop like that, what would happen if you could get something bigger to put acetylene in? Well, now, at that point in time, when we were growing up, plastic jugs weren't readily available. However, these boys knew someone who worked at McDonald's, and they went up there one night and got some plastic jugs that ketchup and all those other kinds of condiments came in. Now they had a receptacle to put a large amount of acetylene in. So what did they do? They filled a jug full of acetylene one day, and they attached a cigarette to it. Of course, they got quite a ways from it. In fact, they went out of the building because they didn't know what was going to happen. Well, when that cigarette lit up that jug of acetylene, boom! Oh my word! It was the biggest explosion. It blew out the windows of the shop. It caused all the buildings, the surrounding buildings of the school, to shake and vibrate. Of course, there was smoke coming out of the windows. It was really something. Fortunately, no one was in the building at the time when it happened. But I tell you what, it was worse than stirring up a bed of fire ants, because I tell you what, people kicked into gear. That place was a hotbed of activity from that point on. In fact, the FBI was called in, sheriffs. It was a major investigation. Now, today, that would be investigated as an act of terrorism. But back then, it was just seen as some boys being boys, but it was pretty malicious. Woo! Boy! Anyway, there was a lot of damage to that shop and the surrounding buildings, and those boys got into some pretty serious trouble. One boy, he was kicked out of school completely. He had to go somewhere else to finish up his high school education. Another boy got a couple of weeks of suspension. Another boy got 3 or 4 days because someone had ratted on him. It's something that you don't do back then, but someone had to give up, give up the names of the fellows who were into all this mischief. But that was really, really something. And it's amazing. No one was hurt, but no one will ever forget that was around during that time. The day the school blew up. Wow. Well, everyone's got stories like that. Fortunately, those kind of things don't happen anymore. We don't need explosions in public school buildings, and we sure don't need kids getting hurt. Y'all be good.